Hello again, this is David Black. This is our second video for learning SculptGL, the 3D modeler that acts as a virtual ball of clay. In our first video, I showed you the basic tools for modeling an object, including how to increase the resolution and add more shapes to the model. This time, we'll take the next step of learning how to add a texture to our model and then export both the model and its texture. Let's get started. Now what we're going to do is import that alien that we created last time. Opening up SculptGL, we have a new virtual ball of clay that we first have to delete. To do that, you go up to Scene, and then choose Clear Scene. You'll get this little message that pops up and say, OK. So now there's nothing there. I'll have to go and import my file. That's under File, Add, and you can bring in OBJ and some other files here. Navigating to the correct folder, I'm going to open up that file and then bring in the alien, which I saved as an OBJ. It's going to take it a minute to load in. Here he is. Now, often when you bring files into SculptGL, they're fairly large. And this file is also quite detailed. Now, ultimately, I'm going to have to turn down the resolution to be able to get it to work inside of Adobe Mixamo. So remember that you can see a model from different angles by pointing off of the model, then holding down your thumb or one of your fingers on your trackpad, and then just rotating it around. So a two-finger rotation. I can also take two fingers and zoom in and out just by pushing on the trackpad. Now, if I want to pan the model, I have to hold down the Option or Alt button, and then I can slide the model sideways. So those are the ways in which you navigate around inside of the SculptGL interface. Okay, but let's start to paint this model. I go under the tools that we have here. So the tool menu, it says brush when you first bring it in, but paint is one of the options. And so it allows you first to pick a color that you want down here, and the standard color picker pops up. So if I choose that, I'm going to go after a medium gray color. So kind of over here in the grays, about like that, but maybe with a hint of blue in it. So I'm bringing up the blue colors, and I'll just pick kind of a medium gray with just a very hint of blue. Now, if you don't want to go in with the brush and paint the entire model, you can actually click on this Paint All button here, and then the entire model will pick up that color. Now, to paint in the details, what I want to do is to create another color. Let's go with something a little bit darker, a little bit more bluish. And I can choose things like the roughness of the paintbrush, how metallic it is, if it shines or not. I can also choose up here the size of the paintbrush, the radius, its intensity or opacity as it paints, and then the hardness. Generally, I want to turn the hardness down quite a bit so that the paintbrush will have soft edges. Now I can zoom in here and start painting some areas like under the arms. See how that's turning a little bit darker? I don't want this to have such hard edges that my alien starts looking like he's got stripes, or she or it. I still have symmetry turned on, so what I do on one side is going to be mirrored on the other side. But sometimes it helps to see that other side just to see how the reflections are going. I'm going to go with a little bit darker color still and just get the armpits in here, kind of dark. The idea is that you don't want to have a model that is all one color. That's boring. And so try to make this as realistic as possible. Now, coming into the head, where do we most likely see a darker color? I might have to turn this and kind of come in under the chin. Oops. And then paint this. Trying to give him a little bit of a sort of a cheekbone structure here. Let's go even smaller to paint around the mouth. You can see I'm having some trouble with the symmetry here. So I really should turn that off. Okay, I'm going to do Control Z to turn off that last little bit. And now I can paint the individual areas. So gradually I'm going to add detail. For the eyes, I want to get a very dark bluish black. So now I'm inspecting the model from all sides. Looking around to see if there's any hard edges or spots. There's a little bit. My brush is quite soft and fairly large. The intensity is turned way down, and so all I'm doing is kind of smoothing the edges of the colors. I think I like this. One final thing here is that my model is in very high resolution. Be able to get all the details of the hand and the face. So I'm going to change this by opening up topology. Although it said it was 150, this model is actually still at about 350. It's quite high. So I'm turning down the resolution of it. I'm inside of the topology tab, and it was at about 350, but now I'm turning it down to about 250. And let's hit remesh. We might have to do a little bit more work on the hands. Yeah. See how I kind of made the hands a little bit choppy? So I'm going to go back into my tools. Let's pick the inflate tool, I think. I'm going to work on inflating the fingers a bit. Now that I've changed the resolution, the eyes don't look nearly as good as they did before. So I have to do a little bit more work. Okay, let's say that I'm happy with what I've got here. I'm going to export this. Now, in order to be able to have the texture export with the file, you have to make sure that this button right here, OBJ Color Append, is turned on. You can set the resolution of the texture. 1024 is pretty good. And so now I'll go ahead and say Save OBJ, and a materials file will save with it. Now it saves it down here as a Your Mesh and gives it a number into your Downloads folder. And so what I'll have to do is go into the Downloads folder, move it to where I want it to go, and give it a new name. Now that we have the model exported along with its texture, the next step, ideally, would be to take it into Adobe Mixamo or some other program where we can add bones and then animations. But getting it into Adobe Mixamo winds up being something of a challenge, at least from SculptGL. What we're going to have to do is take the model and its texture into Adobe Photoshop, which still has 3D capabilities, and then from there, export and clean up and fix the texture, bring it into Clara.io, which is another online browser-based 3D modeling program, add the texture to it there, and then export it as an FBX file, and then take it into Mixamo. So let me walk you through those steps. Let's go ahead and bring this in to Adobe Photoshop. So the model that we just saved along with its texture is called alienwithtexture.obj. I'm going to drag that down to my Photoshop icon, kind of there below the screen, Adobe Photoshop, and show this 3D model. Okay. I'll just let it be the size it's going to be. Now it gives us this error message, or warning, I guess we should say, that the UVs on this 3D scene are missing or invalid. You may have issues painting on this scene or simplifying it. To fix this problem, select Generate UVs in the 3D menu. See, this is the problem that it's been having coming directly into Mixamo, is it doesn't have UVs on it. When we talk about mapping a texture onto a 3D object, for normal space we talk about X, Y, and Z coordinates. Well, for mapping onto a model, that uses U and V as the coordinate system. So these are generally referred to as the UVs, or the texture map. So I'll say OK. And here's the model. Okay, and nicely enough, it does have the texture on it. The trick, of course, is to take this from here in Photoshop with the texture on it all the way into Mixamo. And to do that, we're going to have to turn it into an FBX file, which we can't do directly in Photoshop. So let's do what it said to do, which is to drop down the UVs. Right now over here, it shows us that it's got the base color, which is PS3 default, all this stuff. And then it's got basic IBL and image-based light. In other words, a light that kind of comes with the image so that you can see it. But what we need to do is now generate the UVs. It's under 3D, right here, generate UVs. And it says we're going to flatten down the materials, and you can't undo this. So yes, that's what I want. I'll keep these options the same. Click on OK. The only difference that you see if you look carefully is that now the name of the color is OBJ Mesh Merged Color Texture. That's what we need. It's generated the UVs. What we're going to do is to take this map and bring it in as a separate file in Photoshop, and then edit it, fix it, do what we need to do to make it look good. So let's do that. If I double click on it, it brings it up as its own file. Now be careful here because we've got layer 1 sitting on top of it, which is transparent. So I'm going to flatten this image so that I can paint directly on the mesh. Now let's zoom in and take a look at it. So you can see it's got all of those problems we were talking about when we created the texture in SculptGL. What I need to do is use the paintbrush tool here to gradually color this and to make it look better. And then we will export this back onto the model, and then from there save it into OBJ file again and take it into Clara.io. So I'm using the paintbrush, and I've got the opacity turned down quite a bit, and the size is fairly small here. So first thing I want to do is to use the eyedropper tool to pick up the color I want to use, this dark bluish gray that we set up in SculptGL. With the paintbrush tool, I'm now going to go around the edges here. I don't want this to be absolutely stark, and so that's why the opacity is low, and I've got it set to if you look at it, I've turned down the hardness almost all the way. So I'll go ahead and clean up this texture and then meet you back on the flip side. All right, here we are after fixing the texture. So I've made the edges of the eyes look a whole lot better. I've also added a bit more detail and so on to the eye ridge and to the mouth and nose, the nostrils. So this should look really good once we get it back onto the model. So the next step, I'm zooming out. Everything else in here is basically okay. You can see these lines are basically showing the grid of the polygons that make up the model, and you can see the different parts that are folded together to map out this surface onto it. But it's this area right between the eyes here that's causes a lot of problems because there aren't very many polygons. But now that we fix that, it should map pretty nicely. So in the process of fixing the texture by double-clicking on it and going into it, it's automatically remapping onto the model. So you can see now there's a whole lot more clarity and detail in the face, and the rest of the model is basically okay. Everything seems to be mapping all right. At this point then, we could export that texture as a separate file because we might need it later on. So going back to it, I've got it copied, and I'm going to create a new file, so that's Command N, and this particular texture is 2048 by 2048 pixels. Textures are always square. I'll choose Create, and then I will paste in this texture. But it's got multiple layers, so I have to make sure that I flatten the layers. And now I can export this. And let's make sure it goes to my computer and not to the Creative Cloud. And I'm going to call this Gray Alien, let's say, Final Texture. And I'll just put it up on my desktop until I can decide what I want to do with it. All right, so we are done with Photoshop. The only purpose of Photoshop was to flatten that texture so it's now a UV map and to clean it up. So now what we can do is just export it. So going back to the model, here he is, or she is, or it. I'm not sure what gender this is. So if I go to the 3D menu up at the top, I will now choose Export 3D Layer. So I've chosen wavefront OBJ as the type, and I'm saying OK. It says here alien with texture. Let me add something like final to it and say save. Okay, our next step is going to be to bring this into Clara.io. And to do that, I'll just go to the internet and type this in. Clara.io. I've already got a login. Let's accept all of that. And I'll begin a new scene. And I'll call this Final Gray Alien and create. Right now there's nothing in it. And then I can bring up my model in here. So clicking on that, I'll say File, Import Files. And there's a lot of files you can choose here. So I'm going to say Choose File. I call this Final Gray Alien. So I'll just choose the OBJ file and bring it in. Okay, so for navigating in this scene, you can hold down Command and basically spin around the camera view here. You can use 2 fingers to zoom in and out, and then I can use Control and Command together to pan. I'm on a Mac. Alright, but you notice it's just a solid gray color. There is no material with it. Here's where we've got to bring in that material that we saved out as a PNG. And so I'll go ahead and import that. So File, Import Files. So I choose a file, and I'm going to choose the Gray Alien Texture Final Texture PNG. You see it loading down in the bottom. It has imported successfully. The only thing is it's not on the model. I can choose it here and look at it, but let's go ahead and choose the model. And if I choose material over here on the right hand side, here's where I can bring the image in. Under the base color, I'll choose Select Image, and there it is, the Gray Alien Final Texture. As you can see, the texture has mapped onto the object quite nicely. And then under Color, if I click on that, let's choose some bluish colors here. I'm going to increase the brightness here of the base color. You see that lightens up the alien a little bit. I think this will work pretty nicely. So now we're ready to save this as an FBX file. FBX can handle a lot of different things. It can handle textures, the model itself, and then any animations and bones you want to put on it. So what I need to do now is choose File, and then we're going to export selected into an Autodesk FBX file. Down at the bottom it says Generating Output File, and it says now it's ready. It's calling this Final Gray Alien FBX zip, but I can change the name. It does download it as a zip file, and so we'll have to unzip it before we take it into Mixamo. So I will choose Download, puts it down here in my Downloads folder, and we're done as far as Clara.io is considered for now. Remember that this is a program that can do just about everything you want to. It is free, it's online, and so you can use it on a Chromebook, or I haven't tried it on an iPad yet, but it's a wonderful program. So now I'm going to go to our Downloads folder, which is where this went. Here it is, Final Gray Alien FBX zip. Let's drag this over into our Final Gray Alien folder. And inside of it, I'm going to double click on the zip file to unzip it. So now if we go inside this folder, there it is, Final Gray Alien FBX. Now we are finally ready to take this into Adobe Mixamo. Mixamo is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud suite, which means that you have to have a Creative Cloud license to be able to use it. I don't often show how to use commercial software in these videos, but this is one of the times where I think you'll want to see it, because Mixamo is so useful. As you can see, I have my original Gray Alien loaded in here. He doesn't have a texture on him, so what I need to do is replace him with my new alien that does have a texture. So let's do that. That's called upload character. And you can bring in an FBX, an OBJ, or a zipped file that has both the model and the textures already in it. I choose select character file, and then we go find it. Here he is. It takes a moment to upload, but this is going relatively fast. This is why I shrank down the resolution to 250. Otherwise, it would take a very long time. Here it comes. And here he is, with his texture intact and everything looking good. My next step is to put in the markers. Now, as you can see, my line of symmetry isn't exactly down the middle of the model. So I'm going to have to turn off Use Symmetry here so I can place in the markers where they need to go. I'll just use the standard levels of detail skeleton here, which has 65 bones. But all I have to do is put in these simple markers, and then Mixamo calculates the rigging for itself. So let's begin with the chin. All right, I'm going to put it here in the middle, but not right at the bottom of the chin, but where the chin kind of sticks out the most. And then we'll put in the wrists one at a time. Okay, then I click on Next. And the model starts to rotate around. What's happening is that Mixamo is now calculating where the bones should go based on those markers and rigging this. And it's such a wonderful process. If you had to do this before Mixamo, you had to create the bones yourself and then set all of the weights and constraints on your own, and that's just a slow and arduous process. Even so, it takes a couple of minutes, but certainly better than days. Okay, now here's my gray alien, well, kind of blue alien, and you can see he's moving around. This is just so that I can look and test to see how the bones are working. It looks like everything is working pretty smoothly. The most important thing to look at is the chin. Whenever you have a prominent chin or a head that has a beard on it, when you set the chin marker, sometimes you get some rather strange distortions going on. But this seems to be working quite well. So I'm going to click on Next. It says, your 3D character has been uploaded. Do you really want this character to replace your old one? Yes, I do. And here he is. Now, before I start putting on any animations, I'm going to save out this gray alien as a separate file so that when I bring it into the Mixamo animation character combiner, I'll have the model in the T-pose, and then I can just apply some animations to it. So to do this, I'll choose Download, and it says this is the T-pose version of it. It doesn't really give me an option to give it a name. It just saves it under whatever the original name was in your Downloads folder. So there it goes. All right, that didn't take very long. I can start applying animations to it and then save out those individual animations as FBX files. I've already gone ahead and searched for walking or walk for the types of animations. And then all I'm going to do is just click on walking here. And as you can see, he's walking. That's as easy as it is. All of these animations were created by using motion capture data from real people with a motion capture suit on, and then also filling in the details with machine intelligence. And it's quite remarkable. I can choose in place here so he doesn't walk off, and now we have him moonwalking. Now you can go ahead and turn up the trim here if you want additional frames. So I'm going to do that. So I've increased it to 43 frames. Now it's up to 58 frames, and he's just walking along. I can choose overdrive, which will make the animation speed up and be more energetic. I can increase the character arm space, which makes the arms farther out from the body, but that will look a little bit unnatural. So this is pretty much ready to go. If I want to download it as an FBX file, then I'll click on the download button. If I want to save it directly out to an augmented reality program like Adobe Aero, then I can choose Send to Aero, and that will save it out as a GLB file. Let's just go ahead and download this. Now you have a couple of options. You can save it out with skin or without skin. With skin is what I would normally want to do if I'm going to bring this individual animation into another program. It's going to need to have the skin or the texture with it. But if I'm combining this animation with the original T-pose, which already has the texture, then I could save it out without skin and then bring it into the character combiner. But in this case, I'm going to save it with skin. So I'll go ahead and download. Okay, there we go. We've got a walking alien. It will save it into the downloads folder and we'll just call it walking. So I'll have to give it a new name if I want to, but it's now available for me to use. Now I'm going to go ahead and save out a couple of other animations in the same way, and then we'll show you how to use this inside of the animation combiner. Our next step is to combine all of the animations along with the T-posed alien model with its texture on it inside the Mixamo animation combiner. It's the first choice that comes up here. So when it first loads up, it has a character that's already here. And I can choose different types of animations. It's got all these different dances with it, but I don't want them. So I'm going to delete them until I'm left with just the character itself in a T-pose. And now I will replace it with my particular character. Here it is. It's the Alien from Clara version 2 is what I've now named it. I choose open, and there it is. It's got my alien, and it's got the texture on it. It's got everything that I need. So now that I've got the model and the texture in, the final thing is to bring in the animations. So I choose upload animations up here. It's in the final gray alien file. And here's the different ones. So I've got the walking one that we did. All right. And then I'll just keep uploading these files. Now let's make sure all of these are working. So if I choose it, I don't know why it does this. As you can see, when I bring in the textured model and try to attach the animations, a glitch occurs that has the model floating in the air. The animations do not seem to be working correctly here in the animation combiner. I'm still trying to resolve this, but I do have models that are working. If I create the animations on the non-textured version of the alien, then apply the texture I edited in Photoshop inside the animation combiner, the model seems to work well.
So I've got the basic gray alien in here. It looks like half the model isn't even here, but don't worry, it will work. Now there's one final thing I need to do, and that is to fix the texture problem that we had inside of Mixamo. I'm going to bring in that texture that I fixed and recreated inside Photoshop, which is saved as a PNG. So down here where it says change texture, I'll choose upload file again. And here it is, gray alien texture PNG, and we'll load it in. And you can see now that it's actually showing the eyes the way they're supposed to, the revised mouth and nostrils. It's asking me if I want to delete the current texture. Let's just leave that alone. Now at this point I can choose the different animations. There's walk, here's strut, here's tiptoe. Now I'm going to go ahead and export this file as a GLB. And let's put it down here at the bottom of my window into my downloads folder. I'll have to go in and rename that whatever I want it to be. And now I can bring it into other programs as a directable character, including Adobe Aero.
As you can see, working with 3D files requires moving them from one program to another to add functionality, starting with modeling and texturing in SculptGL, editing the texture to create a UV map in Photoshop or some other program, creating an FBX file in Clara.io, adding rigging with bones and animations in Mixamo, and combining the animations into one directable file in the animation combiner. We then actually have to build complete scenes and render the animations in a final modeler, such as Clara.io or Blender. We'll look at other 3D workflows in a future video that takes us from Make Human all the way to Aero and Clara.io. There are many possible workflow paths when using 3D programs. It all depends on what you want to accomplish. As you learn about Wick Editor and MIT Scratch, you'll also learn how to bring in still images rendered from each frame of an animation and turn them into 3D still assets. Now, this is really high-end stuff, so please start basic and learn how to use the software to build interactive programs, and then you can start adding the 3D components. Just think of all the many possible ways in which you could use 3D still images or animated files in your science media design projects. The possibilities are endless. Thank you for watching this video. As always, keep on learning.